Imagine for a second that you are waking up in your apartment in Toronto, or maybe a condo in Vancouver. It is 2026. You roll over, check your phone, and the first news notification isn't about Ottawa. It's about Washington. A new tariff threat from the White House just tanked the value of the money in your bank account by another 2%. You get up, pour a coffee that cost you $7.50 because the beans were imported with that weak currency, and you get ready for work at a tech company that is actually just a satellite office for a giant based in San Francisco. You pay your Netflix subscription in Canadian dollars, but the price just went up again to match the US exchange rate. You drive to work in a car built in Ontario, but the engine came from Michigan, and the steel came from Pennsylvania. You walk through your day feeling Canadian, holding a Canadian passport and singing "O Canada" at hockey games. But if you follow the money, your mortgage interest rates, your grocery prices, your job security, you realize something terrifying. The border isn't a wall, it's a formality. Is Canada actually an independent country? Or have we already quietly, politely become the 51st state? Let's rip the Band-Aid off right away with a number that should keep every Canadian awake at night. 77%. That is the percentage of Canada's merchandise exports that go to the United States. Think about that. If you run a business and one single client provides 77% of your revenue, you don't have a client. You have a boss. In the business world, we call this single source dependency, and it is a death sentence if that client decides they don't like you anymore. We saw exactly how dangerous this is when trade tensions flared up, and the mere threat of a tariff sent shivers down the spine of the entire Canadian economy. But it goes deeper than just selling oil and cars to the Americans. We have to talk about the loonie. Remember when the Canadian dollar was at par? When you could walk into a Best Buy in Florida and feel like a king? Those days are gone, and economists are starting to whisper that they aren't coming back. The government will tell you a lower dollar is good for exports. It makes our stuff cheap for Americans to buy. But let's translate that into English. It makes Canada the discount aisle. When our dollar is this weak for this long, we aren't competing on innovation. We are competing on being cheaper than Americans. We are essentially becoming the Mexico of the North, a place where U.S. corporations can outsource labor to save 30% while staying in the same time zone. And then there is the productivity crisis. The Bank of Canada recently sounded the alarm, calling our lack of productivity an emergency. In 2024, U.S. GDP per capita pulled ahead of Canada by nearly $20,000. That is a massive gap. While American workers are getting more efficient and generating more wealth, the Canadian economy has largely stagnated. We are digging rocks out of the ground and selling houses to each other, while the U.S. is building the AI and tech infrastructure of the future. If you want to see the future of the Canadian economy, don't look at the Toronto Stock Exchange. Look at the graduation ceremony of the University of Waterloo's software engineering program. It is supposed to be a proud moment for Canada. We've taken our brightest young minds, subsidized their education with Canadian tax dollars, and prepared them to build the future. But if you look closely at the recruiters hovering like hawks at the back of the room, you won't see many logos for Canadian companies. You will see Google, Meta, Apple, and Amazon. There is a saying among these students, Cali or bust. It's not just a slogan. It is an economic exodus. Data suggests that in some years, up to 80% of graduating classes from Canada's top engineering programs pack their bags and head immediately south. Why? Let's talk about the math. Imagine you were a 24-year-old software engineer. You get a job offer in Toronto for 90,000 Canadian. That sounds decent. But then you look at rent. A one-bedroom condo in downtown Toronto costs $2,600 a month. You will never own a home there. You will spend your life paying off a landlord's mortgage. Now look at the offer from Austin, Texas. The starting salary isn't $90,000. It is $140,000 US dollars. That is nearly 200,000 Canadian. Suddenly, the border isn't a line on a map. It is a paywall. By staying in Canada, you are effectively paying a patriotism tax of $100,000 a year. And it's not just tech bros and hoodies. We are bleeding doctors too. We have a family doctor shortage in Canada that is reaching crisis levels. Yet we are exporting medical talent to Michigan and New York because the working conditions and pay are simply better. Canada pays for the expensive Part D education and health care for these people when they are children. Then, the moment they become productive, they leave. The United States gets a fully trained worker for zero investment cost. We are essentially running a taxpayer-funded job training program for the American economy. If you want to understand why Canada is losing its sovereignty, stop looking at Parliament Hill and start looking at that rotting bungalow down the street that just sold for 1.4 million. There is an old joke among economists. Canada isn't a country with an economy, it's a real estate bubble with a flag. In most developed nations, housing is treated as a social necessity. In Canada, housing is the factory. We have decided collectively that our path to national wealth isn't inventing the next iPhone. It is selling the same 1970s split-level house back and forth to each other for more money every 5 years. Investment in housing has cannibalized almost everything else. We are diverting billions of dollars of capital away from R&D and startups and pouring it into concrete boxes in the sky. This creates a structural loss of sovereignty. When your entire economy relies on asset inflation, you become a slave to global interest rates. Imagine you are the governor of the Bank of Canada. You see the economy slowing down. Normally, you would cut rates, but you can't. If you cut rates, the housing market goes nuclear again. If you raise rates, you risk collapsing the housing market and taking the banking system with it. You are handcuffed. You aren't making decisions based on the health of the nation. You are making decisions solely to prevent the bubble from bursting. Now, let's leave the suburbs and head north, far north. Imagine you're standing on the frozen edge of Ellesmere Island. It is minus 40 degrees. You are looking out at the vast white emptiness of the Canadian Arctic. But if you put on a pair of geopolitical glasses, you see the busiest future highway on Earth. As the ice melts, the Northwest Passage is opening up. This is about shipping routes and billions of dollars in resources. Here is the sovereignty question nobody in Ottawa wants to answer. Who owns this water? We say it's ours. The US and China say it is international waters. For decades, Canada has operated on a military strategy summed up in 3 words: call the Americans. We have historically underspent on defense. Relying on the assumption that the US has to protect us. But this free ride comes with a price. In international law, there is a concept called use it or lose it. If you cannot patrol your own borders, do you really own that territory? Imagine a scenario in 2028. A Chinese research vessel sails through the Northwest Passage without asking permission. Canada sends a Coast Guard ship that is half the size and 20 years older. If things get tense, the US Navy shows up. But they aren't showing up to enforce Canadian sovereignty. They are showing up to secure North American security. By letting the US military take the lead, we are implicitly admitting that the Northwest Passage is effectively under American jurisdiction. We are becoming a protectorate. Open your phone right now. Go to YouTube or TikTok. How much of what you see is genuinely culturally Canadian? Unless you explicitly follow the CBC, the answer is probably zero. We are living through the most aggressive colonization of the Canadian mind in history, and it is happening via the algorithm. For decades, Canada protected its culture with strict regulations. But the internet destroyed that bubble. Silicon Valley giants do not care about Canadian content laws. They care about engagement, and American culture drives engagement. If you are a Canadian creator, you learn a brutal lesson. Being Canadian is bad for business. If you talk about Canadian politics, the algorithm pigeonholes you. But if you strip away your identity, if you focus on American news suddenly, you unlock the world. We have a generation of talent actively self-censoring their Canadianness to please an algorithm coded in California. It gets darker with the news ban. When the government tried to force tech giants to pay for news, Meta simply deleted it. Overnight, for millions of Canadians, the news vanished. We are importing their culture wars. We have people screaming about their First Amendment rights in Ottawa, forgetting that the First Amendment in Canada recognizes Manitoba as a province. We are forgetting who we are because the screens we stare at are constantly telling us we are American. Ultimately, the history of Canada can be summed up in one slightly depressing phrase: hewers of wood and drawers of water. Since the days of the fur trade, our strategy has been to dig stuff up and ship it raw to someone else. Canada has the 3rd largest oil reserves in the world, yet 99% of our exports go to the US. We are a captive supplier. When you have only one customer, you don't set the price. They do, but the real story of the next decade is critical. Minerals: lithium, cobalt, nickel, the stuff you need to build the future. Washington is now actively funding Canadian mining projects using the Defense Production Act. The American military is funding extraction on Canadian soil to secure their supply chains. They call this friendshoring. But in geopolitical terms, it means Canada is becoming the strategic resource cupboard for the American empire. We risk becoming a resource colony for the green energy transition. We will destroy our environment to dig up the lithium, ship the raw rocks to Ohio where the high-paying manufacturing jobs are, and then buy back the batteries. We are trading beaver pelts for Teslas. So, is Canada the 51st state? If you look for a formal declaration, the answer is no. But nations disappear not with a bang, but with a whisper. They disappear when their economy becomes indistinguishable from their neighbors. They disappear when their best talent leaves. They disappear when their culture is imported and their land is owned by foreign capital. We are witnessing integration by osmosis. We have outsourced our defense to the Pentagon, our economy to the Federal Reserve, and our culture to Silicon Valley. We have all the trappings of a country, the anthem, the passport, but we are hollowing out the machinery of independence. Sovereignty is a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it atrophies. We are currently drifting into a comfortable, polite obsolescence. But it's not over yet. We have the talent and the resources. The brain drain can be reversed. The housing crisis can be fixed. The military can be rebuilt. But it requires us to stop being polite about our decline and start being aggressive about our future. We have to decide if we want to be a serious country or just a nice place to visit.